Hello, let's talk about Lake Mungo. So if you don't know, Lake Mungo is about strange things that start happening after a girl is found drowned in a lake. So first and foremost, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I really feel like social media resurged this 2008 film. I remember watching this film many years ago. And when it came back around, I was like, I feel like the first time I watched this film traumatized me a little bit. And I didn't want to rewatch it until now. So you're welcome. Overall, this film is about grief wrapped up inside of supernatural and a ghost story, and it's creepy as hell. Lake Mungo was filmed as a mockumentary. So we get interviews from the Palmer family, who is Alice's family. Alice is the 16-year-old girl that died. And then we get interviews with family and friends throughout the film as well. It kind of reminded me of those like true crime shows and like sometimes really bad B-roll. Anyway, moving on. So we are first introduced to the Palmer family, who, as I mentioned, lost their 16-year-old Alice in a drowning accident. And this story has just taken over the headlines. Divers eventually do find her body, and that's when the Palmer family starts to experience a lot of paranormal activity around their home. They are hearing noises on the roof, sounds from outside in the yard, and inside Alice's bedroom with like her door slamming. And Alice's mother starts to have these nightmares about her dead, wet daughter standing at the foot of her bed. And there's also these weird, unexplained bruises on her brother Matthew. So as the film progresses, we see that Alice's mother and father are dealing with the death of their daughter in two very different ways. Her mother, as I mentioned, is having these horrible nightmares versus her father, who just wanted to like move on and like get back to work. But then Alice's ghost decides that she didn't like the way that her father was handling her death, so she decided she was going to appear in front of her father in her bedroom, even though he knew that Alice was dead. Okay, so going back to Matthew, who is Alice's brother. Well, he had a little knack for taking photographs, and he finds a series of photos that he took of the backyard that spans over some time. But then he discovers that in one of the photos, his dead sister Alice is standing in their yard. So later in the movie, he even sets up a video camera in their living room and catches some weird figures that everybody is convinced is Alice. Or was it? Then we get a photograph taken by a family friend, and you can see Alice in the background in the same location of where she died. And this convinces Alice's mother that Alice is not really dead, so much that she convinced her husband that he actually made a mistake in identifying her body, and they exhumed her body from her grave. But at the end of the day, Alice was really dead, and it was really Alice that they had put in that coffin. So Alice's mother also seeks advice from a psychic, because obviously she's trying to deal with the death of her daughter and all these very unexplained things that keep happening. And this is the part of the film where things really just got creepy, because the footage of Alice's mother talking to the psychic, it's very grainy, and Alice's mother is recounting the things that she's experiencing, and she pretty much says that she can walk into Alice's bedroom and she sees that Alice is there sitting in a chair, and she just looks extremely sad. And then the psychic said that they should hold a seance. Let me just say, if anybody suggests that you hold a seance, you just say no. You and I have seen a lot of horror movies in our time, and we know that seances are just not it. And of course, they record the seance that they have, and they catch some footage, and it looks like Alice is standing in the hallway watching them. See what I said? Just say no to seances, okay? Just don't do them. Ouija boards, gotta go. But then we learn, now here's a real kicker that really just threw me for a loop with this film, is that Alice's brother Matthew actually fabricated all of the images and videos that we saw that he used to convince the others that Alice was either still alive or she was haunting them. Apparently, his reasoning behind this was because he wanted to give his mother evidence to exhume her body to make sure that it was her. All I'm gonna say to explain all of these things is that people deal with grief in a lot of different ways. Even after hearing that Matthew pretty much made up all this stuff, they decided to leave the cameras running while Matthew is away. And then they catch Alice's real ghost on these cameras. And on the same footage, her mother spots someone that they all know very well. Someone in their house who is very much alive. And it's their neighbor, which brings us into Alice's safe. And inside Alice's safe is a certain videotape. And if you've seen the movie, you know what's on the videotape. And if you haven't seen the movie, you can kind of figure out what was happening with Alice and her neighbors, actually, because it was 3 of them in this video. We also learn that Alice, before she died, sought advice from the same psychic that her mother also went to come to terms with her death. And Alice went to this psychic 5 months before she died, and she was telling the psychic about these strange dreams that she was having. And in these dreams, Alice recalls standing at the foot of her parents' bed, which if you remember earlier in this video, these were the nightmares that Alice's mother was having after Alice died. So it's like a full circle of this story. Pretty cool, but also pretty fucking scary. So when the Palmer family found out that their daughter was seeing this psychic, this of course caused tension between the Palmer family and the psychic. Because at this point in the film, they'd all had gotten pretty close. Then with about 20 minutes left of the film, we learned what happened at Lake Mungo, which was the location of the school camp that Alice had gone on. And on this trip, Alice had lost her cell phone. So then we learn about some cell phone footage from Alice's friends who were with her on this trip. And in that footage, Alex looks a little lost, a little distracted. She's kind of secluding herself from the group. And their parents can see that she is burying something underneath a tree. So the Palmer family take a little drive to Lake Mungo. They find the tree, they dig in the same location that they saw Alice was at, and they found a plastic bag with Alice's phone, along with her favorite watch and a ring. And on Alice's phone is a video of her seeing herself, that other self is dead. And this vision of herself dead is actually the same image that we saw earlier in the film of what the father saw when he identified her dead body. So after making this discovery, the family at this point is torn. Her mother and her brother are convinced that Alice saw her own death, saw her own ghost, and knew that she was going to die soon. And she buried her rings and her phone and her watch in some sort of like ritual. And her father was very much like, nah, I don't think she saw herself. So once the Palmer family gets home, they said that the vibe of their home was different. They said it felt calmer. And this helps the family start to heal. And they feel better knowing that this trip to Lake Mungo has allowed Alice to be at peace and to move on into the afterlife. They also decided to move away from the home that Alice grew up in and of course the hub of all this paranormal activity. So before the movie ends, Alice has one last visit with the psychic. And it's this really cool scene of both Alice and her mother, both of their sessions, like interlaced between each other. It's cool, but it's also really sad because we can see that Alice's family is pretty much healing. They're moving on from everything. But as they are leaving their home for one final time, we can see that in the last frame of the movie, Alice's figure is in the window behind them in the picture. So this of course leads me to believe that Alice is still there. She hasn't left. She is alone. She is sort of stuck in this purgatory and her family is leaving her behind. So as the credits are rolling, they help kind of fill in some of the gaps of the story. And we can see that Alice's ghost has been there the entire film, even with her brother messing with the footage. And of course there is a post-credits scene with Alice standing at Lake Mungo. Okay, so let's switch gears here a little bit. Let's talk about Alice. I want to talk about like who she was and what was going on with her before she drowned. So Alice, from what I gathered, she was a pretty private person and she hid a lot of stuff from her family and from her friends. Her own father said that Alice was very morbid, and Alice's mother said that as Alice got older, she kind of distanced herself away from people. So we have to assume that Alice felt very much alone when she was alive. She was having nightmares about her own death. She was making adult decisions. And then after she died, her family found evidence of all this stuff and packed up and left. Now listen, I don't want you to think that I am ragging on her family because I'm not. I promise that I'm not. There is only so long that humans can deal with grief. And as I mentioned, they convinced themselves that Alice was in a better place, that she was happy, because when they got home from Lake Mungo, their house felt different. And once you actually really start to think about this film, it's very sad, it's very dark, and it doesn't have a happy ending. Well, at least not a happy ending for Alice. Her family looked like they were healing and they were dealing with the grief as time went on, but Alice, not so much. As I mentioned, she's kind of stuck in this purgatory now. So this is why I said that this movie traumatized me in the beginning of this video, because it's just too real. There are so many times that people wonder, like, if their dead loved ones have moved on, and you convince yourself that they have in order for you to actually have a life. But, like, have the loved ones that we've lost actually moved on? Okay. Let's move on from that. I kind of like how throughout the film, they have the family and the friends explain the weird things that were happening. Because, at least for my brain, I can imagine things when someone's explaining them to be much scarier than what's actually captured on a movie or in a film. And I also like how we were sort of like thrust into everything that was happening. There was no buildup. It was just like these family and friends just dropping these crazy discoveries about their daughter. So I enjoyed the film. Even though it did traumatize me. If you haven't seen this film, I would check it out, but you know, just be cautious with it, as everything that I just explained. But that's gonna be it for me in this video. You guys can subscribe if you want. You can follow me on my social medias if you want. I put new videos out every single Saturday, and I'll talk to you later. Bye. I don't know what this was. Bye.